Welcome. My name is Dr. Robert Gore, and I'm an emergency physician in Brooklyn, New York. And thank you. I'm also a graduate of Morehouse College, so this is almost a homecoming for me coming back to Atlanta. But there are a couple of things. When you think about Brooklyn, you think about rough and tough, and there's nobody more Brooklyn than Iron Mike Tyson. And Mike Tyson had a quote. He said, "Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face." Now, although, just having this idea of a young Mike Tyson in his prime punching you in the face, matter of fact, having an old Mike Tyson in 2019 punching you in the face is a horrendous feeling. It puts us in the frame of mind, how do we adapt when there are adverse circumstances that come in our way? What happens when somebody punches you in the gut? What happens when somebody punches you in the face and you have that entire plan just completely evaporate from you? I'm an emergency physician. I work at Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn, New York. I'm also an assistant professor at SUNY Downstate Department of Emergency Medicine. I also am the founder and the executive director of the CAVI program. And CAVI is a hospital, school, and community-based violence intervention and prevention program focusing on changing the narrative about violence and trauma. We were featured last year as a part of CNN 2018, CNN's Heroes. But one of the things that but some of the things that we got to think about is, what is our life like? Why does stress exist? As an emergency physician, I take care of the imaginable and the unimaginable. A bad day at work for me means somebody died unexpectedly or was diagnosed with a terminal illness. I take care of sick kids and their scared parents. I see a lot of trauma. I see a lot of death. And despite what comes in the hospital, no matter how I feel, my job is to keep people alive. Now, the ER is on the extreme end of the spectrum when you start thinking about stressful environments. But if I ask everybody in here, you all have stress. As a matter of fact, close to 70% of people in the United States experience both physical and psychological symptoms of stress. But everybody has stress. Stress is a normal response. It's supposed to help keep us free from imminent danger. Matter of fact, when we start thinking about mammals themselves and animals itself, this is what happens. A perceived threat presents itself, and then stress hormones like adrenaline are released in the body. They give us the kick that we need to get out of harm's reach. But what we experience now is that stress response is triggered over and over again. It's no longer a survival mechanism, but it's something that's happening over and over and over again. I start thinking about like Marshawn Lynch, when he's like over and over and over, and then over and over and over again. But what happens when that happens is that we experience these levels of toxicity, and it affects every aspect of our body. It affects our ability to heal because it compromises our immune system. It contributes to heart disease. Actually, I was talking to a 50-something-year-old gentleman on the way here, was in shape, ex-CIA, and he's driving Uber right now, but he just had a heart attack last week. And so you start thinking about the levels of toxic stress on your body, and then it also contributes to early death. Now, as an emergency physician, we pride ourselves in a lot of our stories. Matter of fact, most physicians, especially emergency physicians versus trauma surgeons, we try to see how we can outdo each other in terms of the goriness of our details and what we experience at work. Not to discredit internal medicine docs or family medicine docs or pediatricians. All of us are nerdy, so there's just levels to it. But we kind of assume that we're in the trenches, and so we've seen a whole lot. But what winds up happening, I say to my friends and my family, my colleagues, I was like, I've been through a whole lot. I survived medical school in Buffalo, New York. That's actually a car in front of my house that's covered with a few feet of snow. And unfortunately, this was a regular occurrence in the winter. I survived residency at Cook County Hospital in Chicago. Which is an interesting place and space to be in, to say the least, and there are even more stories that come from that. I survived the past 13 years at Kings County Hospital in Brooklyn, New York. I'm kind of a glutton for punishment. I work in the developing world. I've been working in Haiti for the past 10 plus years, pre-earthquake and post-earthquake. Designing programming to help improve emergency medical care and delivery in resource-limited spaces. I've survived the Haiti earthquake, where I worked shortly after in February 2010, and been back and forth to the country about 15 plus times. So I've seen a lot of trauma. But what happens when this trauma keeps happening over and over again? You don't think about the culmination of these events impacting your psyche. You don't think about it having an impact on your overall well-being. You don't think about how this stuff has an impact on your relationships. And again, I prided myself because I was this tough guy. I was resilient because they tell you you need to be resilient. You want to make sure that you're completely strong and you can withstand anything. And I was good at all this stuff until I wasn't. In July of 2015, my life completely changed. That's me before I cut the locks. Women in here, they always experience the great chop. Guys go through it too. When the hairline starts to go back a little bit, we just kind of take it all off. But that's me on the left. And this is my good friend and my mentee. His name is Willis Young. And Willis was a dynamic spirit. He was full of life. He could talk to anybody. He could establish rapport within seconds. He spent a lot of time in the streets. And because of his street activity growing up, it made him the most perfect candidate to be our first hiree when we hired folks for our violence intervention program. Willis's job as a violence intervention specialist was to ensure that people who were injured in our emergency department, our department of trauma, didn't retaliate. He also served as an advocate. He was a go-to person, but he made sure that their lives were safe. But on my birthday, July 22nd, 2015, instead of getting a wake-up call from Willis and my other family members, I got a wake-up call from our emergency department saying, you need to come quickly. Willis was stabbed multiple times, and he was taken up to the operating room. So I head to the hospital, completely frantic, and it was weird because I'm in the place of my work. I'm in a place that I've been to almost every day for the past 13 years, and now I'm on the other side. Now I'm a family member. Now I'm a concerned relative. And Willis was upstairs, and he survived the surgery. He was stabbed more than 9 times by a close friend. But 2 weeks later, because of sepsis or bacteria getting into his blood, he died. And so my life was completely changed at that point. But because I was resilient, because I was so strong, I said, I can take this. So I went back to work immediately. Matter of fact, I went back to work that night. I worked in our critical care and trauma area. And the first patient I took care of was a 24-year-old gentleman who was shot multiple times. And he was stable, surprisingly. But I get into the room, and I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me. And one of the nurses said, that's so-and-so's brother. And I'm like, whoa, so-and-so was a 15-year-old kid that I had taken care of a few years prior who was killed by the police. And so when I go into the room, he recognizes me, I recognize him, and then he makes the sign of the cross because he knew we had a specific bond because I pronounced his little brother and taking care of him and his family. But then the mom comes in, and I was still strong. I'm like, you know what, I've been a doc for a while. I'm tough. I can take this. But then his mom comes in, and she says, I know you. I remember you. You cut your hair. And I'm like, yeah. I was like, I'm sorry for your loss. She said, it's okay. She avoided eye contact with me for the rest of the time because she couldn't bear to look me in the eye because I told her a few years prior that her 15-year-old son was dead. And here I am taking care of her other child who's been shot multiple times. And then her last words when she finally looked at me, she said, did my son say anything to you before he died? And I broke down because the kid told me, don't let me die. I was a basket case, and I didn't know exactly what to do. Here I am, I'm running a nonprofit. Willis, this is the day that he died. Willis grew up on my block. He was my staff member. He worked in the hospital, so I never had any time to actually turn this stuff off. I'm telling people on the block about what happened to him and his status in the hospital. I'm talking to people with our nonprofit about what's going on. I'm talking to our coworkers in the emergency department, in the Department of Trauma, what happened, why this happened. But I'm still going to work every day because I'm resilient, and this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to show up. But then I remember all of a sudden, when I get to the hospital, sometimes I get this tingling sensation in my hands and my fingertips. Other times, I would start getting the shakes. Sometimes I would get into the building and I'm hyperventilating. I'm having these episodes of heavy breathing, and I'm like, what's going on? And then I realized I was having panic attacks. Now, I had treated panic attacks before. I treated patients with anxiety, and every time they came into the emergency department, I'm like, oh boy, here goes another one. But here I am, I'm experiencing this stuff because I didn't know how to turn these things off. Now, many people experience panic attacks as a result of toxic stress, and the symptoms can run the gamut from headaches, body aches, nausea, low sex drive, low energy, fatigue, feeling depressed. The list goes on and on. But what freaked me out the most is that here I am, I'm a health professional, and my job is to keep people alive. And based on how I was feeling, I'm not taking good care of myself. And so I realized that I needed help. But like any good professional, any physician, I avoided seeing a professional. I decided that I was going to put myself even in more work. So I worked even longer hours. I worked on even more ideas. But then I hit a point where I'm like, you know what, this isn't working. And so what did work? Out of habit, I continued my daily meditation practice. I also wound up further immersing myself in martial arts, where I've been training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for the past 4.5 years. Every day after class, and by the way, for people who aren't familiar with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you watch UFC, this is the stuff that we do, except I'm not as big as a lot of those guys. And this is when grown people dress up in very heavy pajamas and practice throwing one another just to achieve and defy laws of gravity. And by the way, that definitely hurt. But there was something about this practice of repeating a movement over and over again, especially a movement that I wasn't good at, to achieve this level of mastery, which was therapeutic, but it still wasn't enough. And so I decided I was going to go see a professional. I went to therapy. Now, I've been to therapy before, but I really didn't want to go back, mainly because I didn't want to have one of those long, ugly cries. You know, the ones where everything just starts dripping out of your face. You know, like little kids, like, you know, that little character on Martin when he plays a little kid and he's on his knees. You know exactly what I'm talking about. But the other thing, another reason why I didn't want to go to therapies was because I had to become vulnerable. I had to expose myself. And then sitting with a therapist, sitting in one of those crazy looking chairs and staring at her, and she's looking at you, and you're dissecting all of your patterns of behavior, and you're like, man, that was stupid of me. You know, like, why did I do this? And the reason why we start thinking about this stuff is because we know better. But knowing better and doing better are two different things. You know, just because we can intellectualize a process doesn't mean that this is a habit that we've overcome and then we've changed and transformed ourselves. So we wound up talking a little bit more, and then after about maybe 30, 40 minutes, she said, I know what your problem is. She said, your problem is empathy. So I looked at her crazy. I was like, huh? I was like, empathy? And I'm thinking about like the Soldier Boy memes in the past when he just goes, huh? But she said, your problem is empathy. And I'm like, why is this a problem? As a physician, it's important for me to understand and to share the feelings of others. As a business person, people talk to you about that all the time. You want to be able to identify with your clients. But my problem wasn't understanding the feelings of others. It was the sharing of their feelings. And in sharing their feelings, I was taking on the stress and the pain of my patients. Heck, I was even taking on the stress and the pain of my friends and my family. It was almost like I needed to be a part of their suffering in order to find a bond with them. And it was mind-blowing. So what did work? One, I had some realizations. You know, first thing is that I really had to establish boundaries with people. And as anybody who's in one of the helping professions, you know, mother, father, parent, caregiver, physician, nurse, concerned friend, concerned citizen, you always have people coming up to you on a regular basis asking you for money, you know, like some of our family members, you know, asking for $5,000, $6,000. I'm about to take what you said and ask to see their business plans next time. But people are always asking you for stuff, and many people in the helping professions will suffer from compassion fatigue because you're not turning these things off, because you're not being mindful of what your own triggers are. And so being mindful and being in a place and space to be able to step back is part of establishing some of those boundaries. So that was the first thing that came up. The second thing was that not all stress is bad stress. You know, people think, you know, oh, I'm so stressed out. Oh, this person's stressing me out. Oh, this is a stressful experience. All stress isn't bad. Now, when stress, you know, keeps happening over and over again without rest, it becomes toxic. But exercise itself is a form of stress. Therapy is a form of stress. Learning a new language is a form of stress. Anytime you take on a brand new skill set and learn a new idea or develop something that hadn't been developed before, there's a level of stress because you are now outside of your comfort zone. But repeating these tasks over and over again can be transformative. exercise being one of them. Last but not least, when I was in the hospital shortly after Willis died, and I was sketching out some ideas, I was like, how do people become more resilient? How do they adapt to change? And one of my medical students came over, and he said, Dr. Gore, what are you working on? And I was like, I'm trying to come up with this concept of adaptation and how we can overcome certain obstacles. And he said, oh, you know about engineering design process? And I've been sketching out all these ideas. I was like, no, what do you mean? What is the engineering design process? He said, by the way, I know you probably don't know this. He said, but I was an inventor and I was an engineer before I went to medical school. Talk about overachievers. And he said, well, engineering design processes is something they teach us at the start of engineering school. First is identifying the problem. What are the problems that we're trying to tackle? And this is something we can apply to our own lives as well as our business, our nonprofits, or even our home lives. What is the problem that I'm trying to tackle? The next thing that comes up is what are the series of ideas that we can use to help tackle this particular problem? And then you come up with all these ideas. You get a chance to brainstorm and brain dump, but then you select a couple of ideas and figure out which ones are those best. Then you select another one, which could be your prototype. And then you test that prototype, and then you go back all over again to figure out how do you do it more efficiently. It's why we have multiple operating systems for our phones. It's why we have to keep making these random upgrades for the iPhone. I feel like that happens like almost every week. But it's also something, when I learn this, I think about a lot of the students that I work with. I think about a lot of the physicians that I work with and a lot of the people I come in contact with in general who have looked at failure as a problem because they're negative emotions that come up with failure. But engineering design process, this just completely wiped it out because you're always wrong and you're always reevaluating. You have this cycle that continues over and over and over again, as opposed to looking at as a destination from point A to point B. This is a cyclical process, so you're always trying to get it right. Every time you get new information and new ideas, and new times change, thinking about social media coming into play and how that completely transformed a business or how your approach to a problem was really important. So we had to start thinking about overall, when we look at stress, we look at health, we look at wellness, we look at who we are, how do we re-engineer our thinking to the point that we can become our best selves, that we can become our most effective selves? I spoke a little bit earlier about resiliency. When you start thinking about resiliency, it's not just, you don't want to just become strong and impenetrable. That's not the goal. The goal is for you to be able to develop yourself in a fashion that you can adapt to change, that you can transform these experiences and really be in a position to thrive, not just exist. Resiliency is existing. We've been there. We've done that. But how do you take these experiences and transform them into something that's going to be impactful for ourselves, our environments, and most importantly, our communities? I want to thank you for hearing me today. My name is Dr. Rob Gore, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the Lead 360 conference, and we'll talk soon.